What is up, football fans? I'm Danny Austin. This is the Live from the 55 podcast coming at you. I don't know why I yelled like that from our Martin Loop, Calgary, Alberta studios. We're recording on a Thursday. Why are we recording on a Thursday and dropping this episode on a Friday? It has nothing to do with the playoffs, to be perfectly honest with you. I was very sick this week. I am still very sick, bloated, stuffy, all the things you want for recording a podcast. That also airs on YouTube. So just feeling great, looking great. But I'm excited, guys. It is playoff football time. You got the Hamilton Tiger Cats and Montreal Alouettes coming up on Saturday. You got the Calgary Stampeders, who I've covered for many years, for the second year in a row, traveling to Vancouver to the indoor palace of BC Place, taking on the BC Lions. Two fun games, hopefully. I mean, I definitely think that the East Division game is fun, and there's a little bit of intrigue in that West Division game too. To set up the rest of the podcast, not just complain about being sick. Got Jeff Hamilton from the Winnipeg Free Press. We got a couple episodes here left. If the Stamps lose on Saturday, we will definitely be recording with Ian Busby on Sunday morning, and then we'll probably do a Grey Cup show previewing that. But if the Stamps keep playing, we'll keep recording. But hopefully 2 episodes after this one before we take a little bit of a break for the off season. I got a lot on my plate. I'm moving a couple weeks here. I'm covering the Calgary Flames. So yeah, so just I don't know. We've had such a fun time this season, and I wanted to make sure I brought Jeff back because he is so smart, and I wanted to make sure that we had lots and lots of time to talk about everything going on in the CFL. All Stars were released today. I am not going to do a big rant on anything, to be perfectly honest with you. I think that the voters did a pretty good job this year. Are there a couple questions? Of course, there are a couple questions. There are always going to be a couple questions, but there's going to be debate. I will say that I was quite pleased. I thought, look, I have one complaint, which is that Cameron Judge, Calgary Stampeders linebacker, was not voted as an all-star. I sort of feel like sometimes we only vote based on sort of tackling totals, and that's absurd. If you watched the Calgary Stampeders this year, you know that Cameron Judge was probably like I had him and Mike Rose as the top sort of defensive players on the team. I am 100% not trying to take away anything from Micah Alway right now. But you look at the biggest games of the year for the Stampeders. Cam Judge had that huge pick 6 against the Saskatchewan Roughriders a couple weeks ago. Then he forced a fumble against the BC Lions on the goal line. His numbers: 90 defensive tackles, 5 interceptions, 2 sacks, touchdown. Honestly, it was an incredible season, and I wish Cam Judge had been rewarded. But look, I'm a voter here. I'm pretty happy with who I voted for in general. I feel like the voters did a good job. The debate is part of the point, but this is not a year where I necessarily feel like there's a ton to yell and shout about. There's always going to be slight problems on the offensive line. Sometimes the defensive backs, it's not perfect, but where's the outrage? Not here. You can find it somewhere else. Elsewhere, CFL. We got the awards finalists. No real surprises, I don't think. Most outstanding player, you got Brady Oliveira out of Winnipeg. It was always going to be him versus Chad Kelly. I have been very openly saying Chad Kelly should win. I maintain that. I stand by that. I have not voted yet on this award. But when push comes to shove, I still have kind of Chad Kelly there. But I think Brady Oliveira's had an amazing season. We'll see. That one's closer than I thought it was going to be. It's closer than I thought it was going to be. Most outstanding defensive player. You got Matthew Betts of the BC Lions. You got a Darius Pickett. Toronto, I think, given Matthew Betts sack numbers, I imagine that we see Matthew Betts take that. Most outstanding Canadian, Oliveira and Decoy. This is where I think that Oliveira does not win most outstanding player, but he wins most outstanding Canadian, and that's very well deserved. O-line, Jamarcus Hardwick and Dejon Allen. I am going to have to speak to some people about this one. I think Dejon Allen had a pretty great season, though. Wouldn't surprise me if he won that one, but also Hardwick's one of the greats. So, look, I'm just going through all this. I don't know if this was really the plan, but as I said, I'm sort of sick. Outstanding special team, Sean White, Javon Leake. I'm going to vote for Javon Leake there. Most outstanding rookie, K. Gray versus Qantas Stiggers. Not even going to pretend that I've thought about that one for a second. Going to have to do some thinking. And Mike O'Shea and Ryan Dinwiddie for Coach of the Year. This one will obviously be Ryan Dinwiddie sort of solidifying his place. Like they went 16-2. They had a first year starting quarterback. Ryan Dinwiddie did some amazing things with that Toronto Argonauts football team this year. So I think that one, with all due respect to Mike O'Shea, who's a leader of men and a great coach, I think that'll be Ryan Dinwiddie. But yeah, beyond that, Alouettes Ticats. How much fun is that game? Alouettes have really come on in the back half of the year. Ticats, though, they got a lot of experience there. As we know, the Ticats tend to play pretty well come playoff time. So, gonna be fascinated there. If I'm picking a team, I'm picking the Montreal Alouettes for now. I have a little bit more. Just look, I think that defense is great, and I think that they have come alive. They've shown me what they needed to show me, and yeah, then you got the Calgary Stampeders and BC Lions. And before I break anything about this down, I really, really want to make this point. I'm going to make this point a couple times during the podcast. Man, Mugs Pub, who's been a sponsor from pretty much from the start of the season. I talk about Mugs Pub as a place where you can watch Buffalo Bills games. I talk about Mugs Pub, the place where I like Wednesday night trivia. I've talked about their daily specials, their weekly events and stuff going on and all sorts of stuff. They've got a great NFL community there. Guys, they're going to be showing the Stamps game with sound this Saturday. I'm definitely going to drop in. I want to be clear with that. I'm also covering the Flames game after the Stamps game. Clearly won't be drinking because I got some work to do. But that's awesome, man. If you were looking for a place in the city showing the Stamps game with sound on, Mugs Pub, man. That's a place to be. Honestly, these guys have been so supportive of us, the CFL podcast, this little podcast, covering our little niche in the Canadian sports world, and it's just awesome. Like I don't think we realize, and I think that if you're listening outside of Calgary, you might not realize how few places are going to have the sound on. And Mugs Pub is really rising the occasion, giving CFL fans, giving Calgary Stampeders fans, maybe giving BC Lions fans. I don't know how many are there. They're all here in Calgary. Give them a spot to come, congregate, have fun, have a couple drinks, have some of their pizza. Guys, their pizza's so good. Also, their fish and chips. I played trivia at Mugs for a long time. But anyways, I just want to honestly, and I'm not doing this as an ad read. Our ad reads come on before the guests, after the guests. I'm doing this because I honestly think it's really cool. And I just want to thank Mugs Pub for real, not just for sponsoring us, but for doing this. And I can't wait to see you guys there Saturday. So if you DM me on Twitter, hit me up, whatever, let me know you're popping by. But thank you to Mugs Pub. Make sure that's a spot to be. That's why we're going to be watching the game on Saturday evening. But yeah, Stamps Lions. I talk about this a little bit with Jeff, so I'm not going to go too far into it. Having a tough time predicting this one. We did see the Stampeders lay a bit of a beating on the Lions, but I think the Lions have been the better team all year. So we've seen that. I don't know what reason we have to doubt them right now. They lost a game that truly didn't matter all that much to them. We can say that it did. They can say that it did. I don't think that they opened up their whole playbook. I think that they tried to hide a lot from the Stamps, and the Stamps played great that game. They played better than they played in any other game this season. So full marks there. We are not taking away from the Stamps performance, but we have to be realistic. And I don't know how you pick against the Lions in that game. Surprise me. The Stamps have not won a playoff game in 5 years. Can you believe that? 2018 Grey Cup, last game that they have won in the postseason in the CFL. That magical night at Commonwealth Stadium when the field was covered in ice. Scary Terry Williams, massive kick return touchdown. Man, that was a magical night. That was the end of an era, although we didn't know it. Alex Singleton, Jameer Thurman, Brandon Smith, Jamar Wall, Levi Mitchell. I'm not going to try to name the receivers because honestly, it was one of the weirdest receivers groups of all time. But I believe Bakari Grant, Chris Matthews. It's a lot of injured guys and late season replacements. Anyways, that was an amazing season. Don Jackson, my guy. Shout out Don Jackson, running back for the Stamps. That was an awesome team, but they have not won since that. So this is a big day. But make sure you watch it, the Mugs. Honestly, I am picking the Lions. I do suspect that Sunday morning I am going to be here with Ian Busby being like, Ian, what happened? Tell me what happened. But yeah, we'll be watching. We'll stop by Mugs. I believe I'm going to then come to this here studio and do the afterburner. No, I'm not. That's going to be next week. But either way, guys, we're having a great time. It's been a fun season. We got a couple episodes left here. At least one, probably two. It's let's go to Jeff Hamilton. Honestly, you know him, you love him. He's one of my closest friends around the league. Just I think he's the smartest guy. Uh, Smartest guy going, whatever that means. Anyways, thank you to Mugs. Thank you to Fraser and Fig. Thanks to everybody for watching. Make sure, guys, I'm telling you, Mugs Pub on Saturday night. It's going to be a spot to be. They got the sound on. Huge supporters of the CFL, huge supporters of this podcast, and we appreciate them so much. And I appreciate you as listeners. Let's go to Jeff Hamilton. Guys, let's say you're having a party. Let's say you're having a picnic. Let's say you're having any occasion. Got to talk to you about Fraser and Fig because I love these guys. Here in Marda Loop, a couple storefronts down from our studio here. Fraser and Fig, man, these guys do these delicious elevated cheese and charcuterie boxes. You know, they're made with all these fresh artisanal ingredients, on-demand grazing, pick up, delivery. You got it. Just let them know what you want. They will get it to you. Honestly, I'm such a big fan. I had a picnic a little while ago. I brought one of their curated boxes and it was a huge hit. I looked great. People loved it. We're hungry. They weren't hungry anymore. These ready to go boxes, they got them in 4 sizes. All their boxes come with meat, cheese, dried fruit, fresh fruit, nuts, olives, pickles, and carrots. Their selections vary from month to month. Choices are always new. You know, just because you've had one doesn't mean you've had them all. I love Fraser and Fig. I love having them as a sponsor. They're the best. Make sure you check them out. Tell them Live from the 55 sent you. All right, Jeff Hamilton, Winnipeg Free Press. One of our last couple episodes had to get you back on, buddy. How you doing?
Great, man. Great to be on. I always love talking shop with you about the 3-down game, and what a perfect time to do it as we head into the playoffs here. So yeah, glad to be here, man.
Yeah, man. Is it all? It's all quiet in Winnipeg right now. It seems like, eh? Just everyone's an all-star. I guess I should ask. Let's start. I mean, how did it feel to be one of the Winnipeg voters who got it so wrong by picking Brady Oliveira as MOP, despite him having a historically great season?
So I have a cop out. I didn't vote this year.
No.
No, because as you know, as I'm the president of the Football Reporters of Canada, I actually am in charge of the tiebreaker. And so
Okay.
it just didn't make any sense for me to be getting 2 votes, right, in a democratic process. So in the event that I already have to decide whether the market be Winnipeg or another market, it just didn't seem like it made much sense. So I passed my vote and I guess my criticism onto my colleague Taylor Allen at the Winnipeg Free Press. But to answer your question, man, it's funny to me. Like it's, I think it's, it was obviously a tight race between Brady Oliveira and Zach Claris. The votes, as there's 5 voters. It was 3-2, so it wasn't like it was Brady's a runaway. And obviously some consideration for Zach, who to add to his argument, did put up better numbers than he has in previous years that he's won the award. Now, I think the big difference in that is this might be not only in the West Division, one of the more tighter races with, obviously between Brady, Oliveira, and Zach, but also Vernon Adams was a guy who certainly deserved a lot of consideration, and Matthew Betts, who, turns out to be the West nominee for, most of outstanding defensive player. So, and you look at over at the East with Chad Kelly, I think this is the closest race, one of them. I know a lot of people are talking about Chad Kelly being a slam dunk and whatnot, but regardless of that feeling, this is easily one of the closest MOP races, in my opinion, than we've seen in years, right? Zach didn't really have a ton of competition over the last couple seasons after he beat out guys in the West. So it's great to see an East candidate like Chad Kelly come out. But yeah, the criticism, and I think there's a little bit, I don't think there's a ton, but I think the criticism is going to come because that if Zach Claris got voted in, it would have been the Winnipeg voters snubbed their own guy. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it would have been, I think there would have been more outrage if Brady, or arguably more outrage had Brady Oliveira not got the vote. So.
And not that this should be like the deciding factor, but I will say that if it was Zach and Chad Kelly, I would have clearly had Chad Kelly. Like it feels closer to me with Oliveira and Chad Kelly than it would have with Zach and Chad Kelly. Now, like I personally, like I just think like Oliveira was incredible this year, and there were like a couple games. I mean, and you and I pretty much like, look, there might have been a couple like Ottawa games that I skipped entirely this year, but for the most part, I try to watch them all. Maybe not on the night of, but like by the time I'm recording the podcast, but like there were just games where Oliveira like looked unstoppable. Like neither of them were bad.
Outstanding. He looked outstanding, and I think that's the debate here is that it's not MVP, and you hear it every year, right? It's not the most valuable player. I don't think anybody is denying the fact that Zach Claris is the most valuable player on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But when you look at the word outstanding and you talk about the impact that each player has on a game, Certainly, Zach is an outstanding player. There's no doubt about it. But Brady Oliveira had a very outstanding year. 2,000 yards from the line of scrimmage, the second Canadian ever to do that,
Yep.
second to John Cornish out in your neck of the woods. To have I think it was the fifth highest, rushing total in Bombers history, or eighth, one of the two. But a lot of those names, like ahead of them were multiple names, right? So you look at what Brady's done, and I think it's disappointing that a guy like Zach Collaros isn't up for that kind of award. But I'm with you. I think it does add an intriguing wrinkle with a Brady Oliveira, just given what he's done in the different position he's had. That might work for him as a running back. It might work against him. I guess we'll have to wait and see. I think a lot of people thought maybe Vernon Adams might get past Brady, because of that same comparison, but that didn't happen. So let's just put our trust in the voters and see what happens.
Yeah, you know what, I think I think the voters got it completely right. And I think that you kind of referenced it. It was nice this year, and this is probably a little bit of Winnipeg fatigue, but it was nice this year that at least going into October, we were having like fun debates about this. Because Vernon
Hmm.
was right there. Like
Hmm.
the Bombers beating the Lions the way that they did there. And I mean, all full marks to Vernon, but then Vernon only playing the first half against Calgary, the whole thing. Like it just
That
ultimately
was
there
just
was
weird. I think that was unfairly against him because it was just a weird situation all around.
yeah, it was. And like this is the thing that I was talking to Jamie Nye on his show earlier, and Jamie was like, well, how much stock do you put in the Stamps absolutely destroying the Lions 2 weeks ago? Like, I have no idea. That was like one of the weirdest games I've ever seen. Like the
So you
Lions were
don't
not.
have like, so how much stock did you how much stock do you put in there? Because I feel like, depending on who you ask, there's different percentages of stock, or how much stock someone's putting into that.
Yeah, I put very little stock in it, as someone who watched the Stampeders very closely and then watched and like again, they rested a lot of guys against Winnipeg and didn't try to do much, but they
Right.
sort of reverted to the mean and looked pretty bad in that. Like got stomped by the Bombers, who have just now twice beaten the Stampeders without Zach, which is nuts.
Right.
Um, but I have a hard time. The Stamps looked one way every single game except this game that supposedly the Lions were trying, but were sitting their top receiver and took out their top or their quarterback at halftime. Like, how hard were they trying?
Well,
I
how much
know
were they willing to show, right?
that's
Because
the thing.
like the game was for something technically, but that was assuming the Bombers would lose out the rest of the season. So I think that was probably Rick Campbell's situation at halftime. While it was certainly odd about him talking about a Vernon Adams being a guy who didn't want to be a hero today, right? Let's save it for the playoffs. Like I
It was a
just
good
think
quote.
it was a great quote. It was and going out of his way to say he was healthy, like that was also an interesting tidbit. But I don't think that they were showing them everything. And I mean, on the flip side, very obvious that Calgary has some solid running backs,
Yep.
to the point where Dedrick Mills is, from what I understand and gather, is might not be on the roster for the West semifinal. That's how good they are at running back. So Peyton Logan and Kadeem Carey, the other way around, Kadeem Carey and Peyton Logan,
Mhm.
certainly fed them they fed them their lunch that game. So I think maybe
And
that there is a blueprint there.
like one of the things in that game being like sort of the Calgary reporters, they also got Bryce Bell back, so they actually had one of their starting tackles back, which opened up the run game a little bit. Like he'd been on the 6 game injured list, so the offensive line was better. They also really pressured like Vernon in the first half. They got to Dane Evans. They like the defensive line looked better. Mike Moore, who I did not expect Mike Moore to have an impact on the end of the season. Like there were things that you looked at and thought, okay, well, this is what the Stampeders can do. But for me, like if the Stampeders have any shot against the Lions, ultimately they have to trust Jake Mayer to look downfield and
Mhm.
like live with the mistakes if they happen. If they just try to dink and dunk, they're not very good at dink and dunking. So like they need to open up the long passing, and that really only goes through Reggie Bagleton. And I think we saw that a little bit against the Lions, but what are you gonna do? Like if you're the Bombers, like this is my test. If you were the Bombers would way rather see the Stampeders than the Lions in the West Final, right?
You know what? It's a good question. I think this might be the only year where I say yes, because there's
Yeah.
always been a concern with the Stampeders, just obviously their legacy, their history against Winnipeg. I think there's always been a little bit of a, I don't want to say like paranoia playing them, but I just think, but this year it's hard to, like, I mean, you mentioned a guy like Reggie Begelton. Like, how do you not give that guy a ton of credit for having to, for what he did this season under the circumstances he was forced
Yep.
to play with, the receiving group being decimated, and really being Markin Michelle had flashes to be sure, but just the guy was just, double coverage was coming up with big plays. So it's just it's hard to really look at the Stamps the same way as a 6-12 team and be like scared of them. But I do think the difference is, to a certain point, is I think Calgary's a little more battle tested when it comes to the weather. So if it is, I think the weather does become a little bit of the great equalizer. It forces you to run the ball. And so if it's pound the rock time, I probably would be a little bit more worried about Calgary's running backs than BC's. I just, I see BC as a very, and they might shove this down my throat by having a great playoff, run, and maybe even get into the Grey Cup. But they're a team that I still think after 18 games is still very much learning how to win and lose. There's
Yep.
a weird maturity to the BC Lions, and I just think adversity is not their friend. The Bombers are battle tested. Adversity is their friend. They don't panic. They don't get worried. They don't have meltdowns on the sideline. Now, having meltdowns on the sideline, to be sure, is not an indicator of lack of success, because the Argos did that in spades all of last season and won the Grey Cup. But it's just
Mhm.
something, there's just something about BC, and hearing Vernon Adams say a month ago that it was only like a month before that he felt like it was really his team. And it just kind of speaks to me a little bit about the leadership group there. And I'm not trying to be too harsh on them, but it's just, you see a lot of instances with meltdowns on the sideline and just guys getting upset. And from what I understand, like, it was that loss to Winnipeg, which was a beatdown earlier in the year, was, a real test to their locker room. So it'll be interesting. I think Rick Campbell's a great coach. I think there's no doubt at all that they are stacked with talent. They're a talented group of
They are.
players.
Yeah.
It's just about them finding that talent on that Saturday and getting it done. But yeah, I think Calgary, just the way they've been, I think the Bombers, I think you're right. The Bombers would probably welcome a Calgary matchup, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the argument for why, like, I don't think that the Bombers look at either of these two teams and are particularly, no, I don't want to say that they're not worried. I mean, they're going to do their prep. I'm not saying anything less than that, but there's a thing with the Lions where it's like the Lions gave them their best punch in early October, and the Bombers took it like in an absolute must-win game at BC Place, biggest game of the season. Like, the Bombers took the punch and rolled and won the game, which I think gives you a ton of confidence. Plus, it's the cold weather. My thing with just Calgary is honestly, like, I feel basically since 2019 when the Bombers just stomped the Stamps in the West semifinal on that freezing day at McMahon.
Right.
I feel like the Stamps always were like, okay, we got to get the Bombers. And every game was like coming down to the last minute. They were incredible games, and you were just waiting for the playoff matchup. Right now, like, the Stamps just aren't that team. Part of that is they've got 15, 16 players on the 6-game injured list. Like, there are
Oh yeah.
excuses here. But there's just never been a moment, to be honest. There was not a moment all season where I looked at the Stamps and said, okay, they figured it out.
They
Except
won
for
2 games in a row once.
once. Exactly. And
So it's
once
like,
we're
how can you
against,
really feel good about a team that doesn't win more than 2 games in a row?
exactly. Which is why, I mean, I do, not to transition completely because I want to come back to the West, but like, the East playoffs are way more interesting this year.
Isn't that funny how it worked out, eh? How the
Crazy.
standings worked out, where there wasn't really a fear of a crossover either way. But you look at what Montreal's been doing. You look at Hamilton's kind of resurgence in the, they lost, I think, their last 2 games. So it's not exactly like riding super high going to the playoffs, but they certainly separated themselves.
Yep.
And then Montreal, man, like Montreal, like I still don't have a read on them, and they might dribble kick their way to a date right into the right into the Great Cup. They might just be turning, they might, which
It's
is
amazing that they
incredible.
did it again. It's
Oh, it's
amazing that
incredible.
they did it
You know
again.
what's funny? It's turned into a problem since they executed it twice, right? Like, a bunch of people think it's, it was hilarious and awesome the first time around, but do it again, it's just whatever. But back to the point, like, Montreal's just been an exciting team. They've won, you talk about playing your best football heading into the playoffs. I'd argue, certainly Toronto's in that group. I mean, they were playing great football with a lot of backups for the last third of their season. But the other two teams I put there is in Winnipeg, who's been playing some of their best football late in the season, and Montreal. They're heading into the playoffs on a 5-game win streak. So I think that one's going to be that one's going to be I don't want to say tighter game, because I think there's potential for the Lions and Stamps to be tight too. But I think you're right. I think the more intriguing matchup is over on the east side, which is not always something we say.
Yeah, I also think like Hamilton may have lost their last two, but the final game of the season doesn't super count to me. And like the reality is, I can't believe I'm going to say this because I don't believe I think you want your quarterback situation like solved by the playoffs. But I do like that they kind of have two guys. Like if Bo goes in and looks like Bo did earlier this year and is throwing interceptions, he's not going to last very long. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like they have a security blanket for Bo, who also could potentially he's still Bo Levi Mitchell. He's still got that potential. I think that defense is clicking. And I think you're playing, and like I hate to say this, and he's probably earned the right for me not to say it, but like you're playing Cody Fajardo.
Those are all fair points. I mean, the thing is like it's interesting, right? Because Bo, like it makes sense that if they start Bo, if they go with Bo, and that seems to be where they're trending. I think Bo got the day off today. I think Matthew Schultz was taking a majority of the first team reps or whatever, but I think that's just more load management in the week. All buzz is saying that Bo Levi Mitchell is going to start the game, so it makes sense to start Bo because while he might not be the Bo that we used to know, he still comes with a ton of experience, right? So there's almost like a certain calmness that comes with him for the other players too, right? Where they see this guy who's been there, done that. The moment's not too big. And to your point, Danny, like if I think the leash is going to be incredibly small, I think it has to be incredibly small. Because if he starts, if he has a quarter and he's not been playing like we've seen from him the last couple of weeks when he's gotten into games and he starts, throwing, if there's turnovers, whatever, I think that's where Matthew Schultz comes in and shines. Right. I think he's used to being the guy off the bench, used to coming in circumstances. So I do think it's a good setup. I do wonder though, man, like, and not to change the topic, but like between Bo Levi Mitchell, Jeremiah Masoli, who's talking about coming back next season, and Trevor Harris, like it's just with all the new emerging quarterbacks this season, like all the young guys that have shown flashes, how do any of those three guys come back on their current constructed deals?
So who of this year's young crop of quarterbacks? Like I am just assuming that Jake is going to continue being the starter in Calgary regardless of what happens. Um Again, I've said this. I think I think an NFL team would be crazy not to give him a look. I just
I
expect that
think
he
he
is
needs a little bit more seasoning. Like I think he needs another year. Like I don't think there'd be a lot of teams with a Trey Ford like looking, you know what I mean? Like if Nathan Rourke can't do what he did and get down there, like unless it's a completely different conversation we're having, right? Where it's a guy who's the mobile guy, right? Like we thought that was the case with Chris Streveler. Like this is a unique, like this is a linebacker turned quarterback who just, the best you're going to get out of him is his ability to run for 5 or 6 yards a carry because he'll truck guys. But they made him a passer in the NFL. Like he still had to be a passer. So I think your point stands, but I wonder if it's not another year. But anyways, you're talking about the
no, and I don't look. I think that the smart thing, like the betting odds would say bet him on him going in another season. It's just like you always hear guys with a really, really unique physical skill. Teams are going to want and they're going to develop, and that guy's legit fast. And I know that because Mike Rose at one point joked to me because he was getting asked, this is last year because the Stamps played the Elks, and he was asked like so many times about playing Trey Ford with his speed. And at one point, Mike Rose was like, I did play against Lamar Jackson, guys. And then after they played him this year, he was like, nah, that guy's fast. Like I do think that it's like unique enough that a team might want to just get him in their system and start working and developing him. I know that's also typically not how things go in the NFL. So, but either way, like I don't think Dustin Crum is going to be a starter next year.
So this is my thing with those three teams I just mentioned. They all have a guy in the waiting. So my point isn't that you necessarily just just completely dissolve yourself of a Trevor Harris or a Bo Levi Mitchell or a Jeremiah Masoli, but you are setting yourself up, man, that if you bring those guys back and they get injured again, like you can't just be like, oh, like you didn't expect that was happening. Like I want nothing more than Jeremiah Masoli to come back and play on the field. But
That
if
was Achilles, wasn't it?
it was
That was
Achilles, a
God,
ruptured
that's
Achilles. So
in his
like,
late
but
30s?
and well, and that's the thing. And like Trevor Harris, like, yeah, we get it. He's like a Tom Brady, kind of guy who has incredible, discipline and nutrition and all those things. But he's up there in his late 30s now. And it's so like if those guys' bodies are breaking down, and Bo's the same, man. Bo
Right.
had a couple good flashes the last couple of weeks, but we haven't seen the guy dominate since 2018. So it's
No.
like, I mentioned restructured contracts because I think you have some competition in camp. Like I think Dustin Crum needs to go into Ottawa next year and be in a battle for the starting role if that's against Jeremiah Masoli. I'm not saying hand the guy the reins. I'm saying he's in the battle. Jake Dolegala should be in the battle if they bring back Trevor Harris.
Shitty.
Should he?
Shitty.
Well, why not though? Why not though? You know what I mean? Like there were flashes. It was his first year. Dustin Crum's first year. It was,
That is true.
like these guys, like you talk to any quarterbacks, man. Talk to Cody Fajardo. Talk to Jason Motts. He's probably the best guy to talk to because when he was in Toronto, he used to take guys like Zach Collaros and other, Cody Fajardo and those guys who were in that system and used to take them outside of practice and give them reps, give them real reps because Ricky Ray took all the reps. He took every single rep. There was no sharing reps. So Jason Moss used to take these guys and show them. So when you talk to these guys about how they got their start in the CFL, for some, including Cody Fajardo, it took years as a backup. And then you need to execute when you get the opportunity. One bad game could mark the end of your career. And so, like, to see Dustin Crum do what he did, to see Jake Dolegala beat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and beat the BC Lions this year, you know what I mean? We talk about how great Toronto is, and they have been great. They had by far the easiest schedule in the CFL. All those bye weeks that all of a sudden were such a joke that they had 3 bye weeks early in the year. Well, thank goodness that they got those victories when they were all rested, that they could just sit for the last third. They played BC.
True.
They played BC and Winnipeg once each. And they didn't, and I'm not taking away from the Argos in their fight. I mean, they lost by 10, 12 points against the Bombers, but they pulled their backup to put in another backup in the fourth quarter. So there's impressive things, but they had an easy schedule.
Yep.
But my point is that, like, back to my original point was that you need to bring these younger guys in, not like, bring back the old guard and old vets and hope for different results. You need to have a competition in there, but you can't pay these guys $500,000 a season as maybes. You know what
And
I
that's
mean?
100%. You're 100% right. My thing is like, I still would look, Mazzoli, that one's tough. Like I have a hard time, and I'm not trying to hey, go for it, bud. But like you're at a certain age, Achilles injuries, you never really come back from, no matter what anyone says. But like Trevor Harris, like that Riders team was significantly better with Trevor Harris.
I don't agree, man. Like he was okay, but they weren't great. Like Trevor Harris was not great before he got hurt. Like
They weren't 7 losses in a row bad.
No, I mean, no, for sure not. And that's where the experience comes in. That's where, and Trevor Harris had flashes of greatness while in a Riders. But I think those flashes, like there's a couple beautiful tosses he throws out to the sideline that I don't think a lot of quarterbacks can throw in the first few weeks. But that was mixed in with a lot of garbage passes too, and a lot of ineffectiveness. Like Trevor Harris, like the Riders were not rolling. But to your point, what an absolute collapse at the end of the season. You'd have to think that Trevor Harris would have brought some stability and most likely some wins to that, and would have been enough to get in the playoffs.
I can't prove it, but like they would have made the playoffs had he been healthy.
I agree with that. I agree with that because you have to lose the way they lost to get out of it. Like the fact that the Riders didn't make the playoffs is absolutely surreal.
Oh, I mean, the first half of the Banjo Bowl broke them. Like I don't understand how it happened, but how they went from beating the Lions and the Bombers to like Zach having the single best half by a CFL quarterback I've ever seen. And then the Riders just never recovered. Like there's got to be a deep dive into what exactly broke in that half because like they were better than they were in the last 2 months. The last 2 months make no sense.
No,
And
they are. But I think they're just not like BC. They're worse as far as locker room, right? Like they might have some maturity stuff in BC, but they got the talent in Saskatchewan. It's just like you can tell guys are on their own agendas, like even great players like Moncrief like would lose it, right? Would lose it on guys, and like, you would just never you just never understood, and then you'd always see Craig Dickinson in the background like trying to get things in order, but like the guy's pretty much treating him like the substitute teacher. You know what I mean? And that just like that doesn't that's how you lose 7 games in a row. You know what I mean? That's how is that you buy into your own height and there is no accountability. It doesn't matter if it's football, NHL, whatever. When you have a locker room that doesn't have accountability, you're not going to win a lot of games.
No, I don't disagree with that. Who do you think who would you like? It's the question that I get asked when I go on radio. Like, I still think if you can get Milanovic, you'd be crazy not to bring him in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about Milanovic, but certainly, like, his experience in the league, and I just don't know much about him as a human. And the reason I bring that up is because I think that that's a big part of the puzzle here. Like, I think as a head coach, and I wrote about this in my weekly CFL rundown column this past week. I don't know if Henry Burris is the right pick, who's gained a lot of momentum, you know, or
That'd be
Scott
hilarious.
Milanovic. But I
Mhm.
think as a head coach, I mean, of course you need to know the game. Of course you need to, you know, be passionate about it. You need to put in the hours. You need to care. And I don't think there's a single head coach in the entire CFL that doesn't have that. That doesn't, eat and breathe football. That isn't staying in their offices till midnight on most nights, trying to
Yeah.
figure out a way to be team. I think the big difference is you have to be a leader of men. You have to have players who have enough respect for you that they know not to cross the line. But you also need to have accountability and rules in place. Like a lot of the stuff that we saw, and I don't want to beat up on Craig Dickinson because he's probably the nicest guy in the entire
He's the
CFL. Like
best.
I don't even think it's debatable. But he clearly did not have a leash on his guys. He didn't have those guys, and those guys didn't respect him enough to follow the rules, and they didn't have a leadership group that to enforce the rules that the coach has. And so the coach needs to have the respect of the locker room, and then he needs to put great people around him because it's the
Mhm.
people around him that are going to make him look like a good coach. And so the head coach, in my opinion, installs the culture, brings in a leadership group, which is obviously in charge of the GM as well, to bring in those guys that are not just talented, but are accountable and are going to set the example for the rest of the team, whether it be veteran or rookie players. And then you need to have the people around you doing their jobs. Because once the culture's in set, you have good people doing their jobs, everything falls into place.
Yep.
And so whether you're, a Scott Milanovic who has tons of experience in this league and has won in this league, or you're a Henry Burris who has no head coach in this league, but we all know what he was like as a leader on the field. I think you need to bring in a guy that's really going to inspire everybody, and then again have that talent around.
Yeah, and it's the piece that I do think is tough because like we both, and I mean I will name two. Like Devon Claybrooks was an incredible defensive coordinator who lasted a season in BC and it went very poorly. Paul LaPolice is a guy who was a great coordinator in
Totally.
BC elsewhere, did not work in Ottawa. Like it's just a different job. And I mean, I always say, I'm like, look, man, I can tell you what bar coaches go to after a Stamps win in Calgary. I'll tell you who's not there, Dave Dickinson.
Right.
Like, the head coach doesn't get to do that stuff. The head coach has to go and watch tape, or doesn't have to. It's what they do. And it's just, it is a different job. And it's always where it's hard for me. Like, the guy I know will be a good head coach at some point is Corey Mace.
Right.
I genuinely think Corey Mace is perfectly happy right now, continuing to learn and grow as a defensive coordinator in Toronto.
Insert Buck Pierce.
It's
Same
exactly.
same story. And even talking to Mike O'Shea today, because I asked Mike about winning that, or not winning, being nominated out of the West as the coach of the year. Um, you know, Mike was never going to talk about himself. So I asked about what it meant for his coaching staff, right? And he kind of even mentioned getting up on his soapbox. And Mike O'Shea, he doesn't
Yep.
often get up on his soapbox, but he talked about coaches, great coaches. And he never mentioned Buck by name, but Richie's also included in that list, and Corey in Toronto, obviously, and more coordinators around the league, is that they deserve to get paid accordingly because they do well at what they do. And often,
Yep.
to your point, we look at success and experience, and we automatically equate it to a leader of a team, a la Police, a la Devon Claybrooks, right? Like we just assume that it's going to work.
Was he there? Was that a subtle reference to the coaching cap? Was that what he was
Yeah,
trying to get
totally,
at? Okay, good.
100%.
Just wanted to
Not
make
just
sure I read
yeah,
that
like he,
right.
he even mentioned the cap, so it wasn't even subtle. Like he
Okay.
said, he just yeah, absolutely.
The coaching cap remains. Like, I occasionally, as you know, people yell at you on Twitter for stuff, and
Mhm.
there are fans who just genuinely are like, no, the coaching cap is vital. And like, I think that they're dead wrong. I just like,
Well, the coaching cap is vital, not because it's vital for the improvement or the quality of coaching in the CFL. It's vital because you had guys like Chris Jones and an organization like the Saskatchewan Roughriders that enabled him to be completely ridiculous. Like remember that CFL week where they were doing interviews for draft players and there was like 30 employees. And remember that was the same year they had like a second practice roster team. Like it's just once you abuse the rules, because this thing here's the thing about the CFL,
so
man. You
is
know,
that abusing the rules? Like, is that abusing the rules though? Like, it's them gaining a
well,
competitive advantage.
it's just so yes, yes, so technically not against rules. It would be against rules now, but to me,
Mhm.
it's just I think it's fiscally responsible. Like I think some of these
Okay.
teams need to be held fiscally responsible because and I also think because you have a team like in Toronto who just happens to be awesome this year and has been good for years, they're not investing in 30 coaches. You know what I
No,
mean?
of
So
course.
like so you kind of, and whereas in Saskatchewan, they might be all more than happy. Now the player thing was illegal and they got punished for it, right? They got exposed for it and punished for it.
And I think that like my thing is that, and the CFL is different, but like in every other sport, like look, if Toronto Maple Leafs have more money, if they want a bigger scouting department and a bigger analytics department and to spend more money, we don't limit their ability to do so. We
Right.
limit their ability to spend on players. Now, why is that? That's a good question, but it doesn't personally bother me. Like if the Riders have more money and want to spend more money than the Argos, like go for it as far as I'm concerned. Um,
Yeah, that's
but
fair.
there's also a limit to that, and if you called me out, I'd be like, "Jeff, I'm sick. I can't actually explain. I can't actually
Explain
explain it."
yourself. No, I think no, and I
Yeah.
think that's a great point. I'm not suggesting that was put in, that was voted on, and
Yeah.
like it wasn't like Randy Ambrosi made the first ever decision on his own and
Yeah,
just
that's true.
put in like this was voted on by the leaders of the teams.
Yeah.
So like they were saving them, you know what I mean? And they probably looked at the Rough Riders and was just like, hey, like not only were you not doing well, you were, you just were making a bit of a mockery of this thing. And like,
And
yeah,
you're changing the market, which is also part of the problem,
for
which,
sure.
um, which I get. Um, I don't really
I don't
have,
like how it sticks with the cap. I don't like how it stays with the cap, right? Like if you want to, like you can't make a mistake. So it puts teams in weird positions where they can't really get rid of Chris Jones if they wanted to
yeah.
because of the cap. After that first year, if you're like, wow, this doesn't. You just brought in a bunch of aging 30-year-olds and this is embarrassing. Like you might just want to be, you're done, right? But I think you have, where the money comes into play is you can make decisions where it's not screwing you, where you're not making decisions based on where you need to fit the money in the cap. Like Bob Dice is a great example. Bob Dice, there's no way I mean, I know the reports came out this week. There's no way that the Red Blacks were going to let him go. They just made him the coach. Last year was the first year, or this year was the first year of a 3-year deal. Why would you pay Bobby Dice 2 more years,
No.
like under when you can under the current, cap, the non-player operations cap. So it is a little bit of a funky thing, but it was brought in and voted on by ownership because for an obvious reason, it was getting out of control.
Oh yeah. I mean, I had I had coaches literally because it was the presidents who voted on it. And I know that at the time, one of the things that coaches said to push back was like, why is there no limit on president's salaries, but there's limits on ours? And like there's
Yeah,
a million issues.
they ain't voting on that one.
They're not, they're definitely not voting on that one. But yeah, I mean, look, it's that's small. I will say I'm generally happy with the All Stars. I don't have any like I'm not gonna waste any time here. I don't like the Cam Judge. Like personally, I think it should have been Cam Judge and not Micah Alway. Um,
Mm,
but there were what 11 bombers. I think in general. Jamie and I
11, yeah.
asked me about one of the DBs. I have trouble voting for DBs. It is something where normally I canvass the reporters from around the West Division, and I'm like, "Who's good on your team?" and then try to talk to coaches. But I think we did a good job this year.
Yeah, I mean, we did the job. And like I wrote about this too, is that people go, well, football reporters don't watch the game. I can give you the list of names. Like everybody
Yeah,
watches football on that list. Like you might not like might not like their votes or whatever, but everybody is for the most part, not for the most part, everyone's qualified to vote. Um, maybe there's some things that we could do as a group that could be more transparent, like releasing the votes, right, on who
mhm,
people vote for. That would certainly add an element of accountability or any kind of concern that there might be homerism involved here, which again, I don't, I don't
I
think that's
have
the case.
in the like 2016 to 18 era when the Stamps were the top team, there were moments where I was like, oh man, like reporters from this market hate Calgary players because, and I was just wrong. Like if there's one thing that it's not, it's homerism. I will admit I don't always know that I should get to vote for like the all-star left guard. There are times when with offensive line and I just have to rely on what coaches tell me. I just don't have any choice.
Yeah.
I don't watch the Winnipeg interior of the offensive line well enough. I openly admit that. It is basically me speaking to a bunch of people and coming to a consensus on where those votes should go.
So I should add some not breaking news, but a little bit of insider info to the live
Whew,
from the 55 podcast. I actually decided on Calgary's offensive lineman.
did you?
That was tied. And I know Ryan Scrivier had a great season, and I know that Sean McEwen was also up. They were tied.
I'm shocked by
And
that.
so here was my thing. Like to your point, I didn't just go, I'm gonna pick like, first of all, I don't feel all that comfortable making decisions out of
Yep.
other markets. But what did I do? I called 4 teams and I
Yep.
asked them players on their D line who they play against, and I asked them, and Sean McEwen won by 1 vote.
Wow. That's
And so,
amazing.
like, I'm not, and there was about, I think I had 11 votes because I needed to be odd. And I got these text messages came in over the next few hours of who they would have voted for, and it was by 1. And so I took the vote out of my hands and went to people that I trusted when it covers them. And and even then, part of me was thinking, if it's so close between these 2 guys, why wouldn't I just give it to Ryan? Right? I mean,
Yep.
because whatever.
McEwen's
But I
had it a
want
million times. Yeah.
exactly, and I wanted to talk to people who knew the position that played against the position. Because, but to my point though, is that it's that like everyone talks about the vote, the FRC voters and the head coaches. Is that the right mix? Well, we all saw the outrage when we gave it to fans. like like I've never faced more criticism in my life personally over a choice and then felt such validation when it came out and it was fans that voted this, that the CFL somehow put too much weight. The
Yep.
other thing is players. Again, I know I'm about to contradict myself here because I asked those players, but I don't know if we can trust players.
The CFLPA All-Star list is not better.
Exactly. It's just I think there are guys out there that are just disliked.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And nobody would vote for a guy they don't like. Like I think there is personal grudges. I think there's a bias in everything. There's no such thing as a non-biased, objective voter because everyone has their own biases, whether they're from a market, whether they watch more teams than others, or whatever. So in my belief, I think that voters who cover it and are journalists, are tasked to be journalists, are, well, not perfect and arguably far from it, are probably the most qualified to make the decisions.
I agree,
Assuming
and
they do their research.
and I will say,
Right?
like, I genuinely like. Look, I think that Cam Judge instead of Mike Holloway should have been an All-Star. That is my one sort of like. But I don't know. I'm not gonna comment too much. But like when it comes to the Calgary votes, I didn't have Rene Paredes as my special teams player. I didn't even have Mike Holloway in my top 2 for defensive player. Like
Mm.
I also disagreed with the Calgary voters, who are people I'm friends with and talk to pretty much every day about the CFL. So like what you do realize is that ultimately like this is objective or this is subjective at some point. Like it's just it, I think we got it pretty close to right this year. And I
Hey, I like to think that every year, but you know what? I also appreciate other people's opinions, and I think I think what's lost in maybe some of the criticism is the passion that people have to
yeah.
care enough that these people are even being nominated for the awards. To me, that's great news. I hope you bash, I mean, take it easy on the criticisms, but like, on
Yeah.
the personal insults. But if you disagree and want and have an opinion about it, I'm all for it. I'm all
Yep.
for your opinion. That's why it's a democratic process. It's not like one guy is making the decision or one girl is making the decision. It's a group of people, and then there's the results.
And like we need more debate. Like that's the funny thing. It's like I like led with being like, how did it feel to be a Winnipeg voter who apparently got it so wrong on that? Like I love that 3 Down disagrees like this vehemently with Brady Oliveira. Like I love it. It's fun. Like
I
they're
don't
not
know if
actually.
they just but like I said, like I think if it's not Brady, if it's Zach and not Brady, then our boys over at Three Down are writing about how the
Exactly.
Winnipeg guys shafted one of their own. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like, it's just, and I love that too. I'm like I said, I'm all about debate, man. I'm all about criticism and trying to find better ways to do it. In fact, I keep referencing my column, but that's what my lead-in was: is that the process is flawed. Like, why do we need team awards? Like,
Yeah.
why does a guy need to be best defensive player on his team? Like, I get that's kind of cool to win that award, and players might have goals of that, of course, and maybe even have that in their contracts as incentives that they win the team level. But like, what I think robs true voting and prevents a situation like why is Brady Oliveira and Zach Collaros, why is it one or the other? Why can't it be both? Why can't we decide who the top 5 MOPs are in the entire division, and then vote on those guys regardless of whose team it is? Like, why do we
Yeah.
need an Ottawa MOP? You know what I mean?
Or
Why do we need an Edmonton MOP? Like, Trey Ford wasn't winning anything.
no.
Like the only, and the fact of the matter is, with the current system, everyone was talking about whether it was going to be Brady or Zach versus VA, right? Where it could be Brady versus Zach versus VA versus Matthew Betts versus whoever, right? Like, bring in all those guys and then have them voted, and then make it a vote. And I think you prevent those kind of things. But that's something that obviously would need to be talked about at a league level and a player level. And I think the PA really does enjoy the team awards, but I'd like to see in the future those things change, because while I know there's a lot of traditionalists in this league, and I'm not suggesting we go to 4 downs. Just to be clear, I'm saying I think we can look at the voting process and come up with better ways and more accurate ways of determining who actually is deserving of those awards.
No, and I agree. And I'm never, I would always agree with that. While also, again, like this is just a year where when I looked, I wasn't that outraged. And like, I just bring myself back to a year ago. And like the morning where it had snowed like a foot and a half, the Stamps were practicing indoors, and I showed up and saw the All Stars. And then you and I basically broke it together that
Yeah,
they'd sent out the wrong list. And like today, it was just a better day than it was last year. That's all I'll say. It's like I
yeah,
just
it was
I
definitely it was definitely a better day for the league and for 3 down football overall compared to what it was like last year.
exactly. All right, well, buddy, Winnipeg Free Press. I mean, I will recommend checking out all your Bomber stuff, but that weekly CFL column is honestly the best read. So also people should definitely check that out. I don't know anything you want to throw out to, or
No, man,
just
I really appreciate coming on. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours right now. I think I've said this to you lots of times, man. I think these podcasts are awesome. I mean, I love what Three Down does with their podcast. I love what you do with your podcast. Like, there's a real appetite, I think, for CFL football and just knowledge around the league, right? Things that are going on. I think the more we have that, it's our role in a way to help grow the game and be part of the stakeholders you hear so much about, right? Whether that be the fans, the players, or the media, right? Like, we all kind of have a role here, and certainly bringing attention to it, whether it be negative or positive, is attention nonetheless. So love what you're doing here, man. Appreciate you doing it all season. I hope you have a couple more episodes at least, and certainly want to hear your voice talking about the CFL through the Grey Cup. So I'm going to probably pressure you a little bit here. I know you
I
got a
think
heavy plate, man. You might be the hardest working guy in Western Canada, but
yeah.
um,
And just to be clear there, the plan is basically like we're tied a little bit to the Stamps, but we'll do a Grey Cup episode. It's
yeah,
just I'll be perfectly honest with you, like
I want to hear Busby's ridiculous takes for another week. You know
I
what I
know.
mean? I want to see him and the wacky thoughts in his brain driving up to the studio, and I want to hear them all spill out for at least a few
Busby
moments.
is going to Grey Cup.
Yes.
Like God help us all. You'll be there regardless, or no?
Yeah,
Just
that's the plan. Definitely,
okay.
obviously, when the Bombers are there, it might be a bit of a modified trip if they're not. But I've been pretty spoiled going to the last 7 or so. So, the Bombers have lived up to their end of the deal with getting me there. So
Yeah.
I think with work and how much we're putting into our travel and covering the CFL this year, and of course the NHL this year with the Jets, it might just be a bit modified. But how about them adding another day to the Grey Cup? Like that wasn't enough.
So am I right? Uh, I don't know. You know what? I'll just ask directly. 'Cause you don't have to answer. Is it true that Ambrosi is going on the Tuesday, like the commissioner in the
Tuesday
U.S.?
morning, which is
That's
odd.
insane.
So yeah, I mean it's odd, but it's
I
after like it's I don't know. It's after. I don't know how early it is. Like, it's not. I don't think it's like 8:15 like it was in previous years. That's when they really test you. I think it's a little later in the day, maybe like 10 or so, but yeah, that is I can confirm that it
The
would be
commissioner's address is
Tuesday,
on the Tuesday.
which we're trying to work in getting in some online opportunities, right? Because I think it's going to be
I mean, they better because it's just going to be a rash otherwise.
it's just going
It's
to be a
just
rash with a microphone,
gonna be
just
a rash and
and
nail
maybe
it. Just
myself.
yeah,
Yeah.
and maybe.
Yeah.
Well, all right, buddy.
Hey, and
Thank you
you know
so much.
what? In some ways, man, that might just be enough to just get the scathing questions out and just get because there's I was actually starting to make my list. Scathing, look at me. I was starting to make my list of league topics yesterday. I was going through stats and I was going through the dribble kick and like there's a lot of interesting
They
things.
better not get rid of the dribble kick, man.
Oh, I don't think they. Yeah, I don't. They certainly won't get rid of it this year. But there might be teams out there that are like, come on, you know what I mean? Like, it
It's
changes the way
hilarious.
defenses are playing. But yeah, we'll see. Lots of excitement coming up here, man.
You bet. All right. Thank you, Jeff. That's it.
Appreciate you, bro.
Guys, what are you doing tonight? I don't know what you're doing tonight. You're probably looking for something. Guys, you got to go check out Mug's Pub. This is probably my favorite pub in the city, 1330 15th Avenue Southwest, right in the Beltline. Honestly, they do it all. I, for years, played trivia on Wednesday nights at Mug's. It's the best trivia night in the city. Other nights, they got music. They got specials every single night. Some of the best food and drink specials in the entire city are at Mug's Pub. You want wine, you want beer, you want cocktails. They got it all. Big fan of their fish and chips. They got some amazing pizza. You want to watch the game? They got TV screens. You want to just have a drink with friends? Perfect spot to do it. You want to have some food? As I said, it's delicious. Mug's Pub. We love having them as a sponsor. We love having them just down the road from us here at our studios. Check out Mug's Pub. They're the best. All right. Thank you again to Jeff Hamilton. Honestly, I'm so appreciative of him for dropping by. I want to make sure we got him on one more time. He is one of the people who, for years now, whenever I would roll into Winnipeg, whenever the Bombers were in Calgary, one of the real highlights of my CFL season was getting to talk to Jeff, catch up, and grab a drink or dinner. One of the things I'm truly grateful for having covered this league is getting to become better friends with Jeff. There's a lot of great reporters there in Winnipeg, and across the country, but Jeff's the best of them. Wish I could hang out with him at Grey Cup, but it's okay. Guys, we got a couple episodes left here. Sort of depends on what the Stamps do. But one way or another, we're going to be back Sunday. We're going to have Ian Busby here. It's going to be great. Saturday night, in case you're wondering, we're going to be at Mug's Pub for a little while. I'm not going to be drinking because I'm doing some reporting on that game, doing some reporting on the Flames game afterwards. But honestly, Mug's Pub is going to be playing the game with sound on. And that's pretty rad. Not a lot of places are going to be doing that, but it's going to be the best place in the city to watch the Stamps and the Lions. I promise you that. If you're going to head there, please just give me a shout. But please, honestly, guys, if you're looking for a place to go, support them. Mug's Pub's been a great supporter of ours. I've really, really appreciated them coming on board, helping out this little CFL podcast as we try to build something here. And we want to make sure that we thank them and we pay them. And again, playing that with sound, you're not going to find a ton of bars in Calgary, not very many at all. So it's very cool that they continue to sort of be there for the Canadian football community here in Calgary. It's going to be an awesome time. I'll be there. Hit me up if you're going. I'm not going to buy you beer necessarily, but we can hang out. So yeah, that's it for me. CFL playoff time, guys. It's the best time. I cannot wait to talk to you guys again on Sunday about these games. Stamps, Lions, not Bombers, Alouettes, Ticats. What a time to be alive. We finally made it. Thank you to you, my listeners. Please like, subscribe, tell your friends, check us out. We'll be back. And yeah, beyond that, thank you, Muggs. Thank you, Fraser and Fig. Thank you, the Nation Network. We're out. Peace.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to check out more of our content right here on the Flames Nation YouTube page. We had a bunch of great long form interviews. You can check out some videos we've done as well outside of the studio. And of course, if you want more writing or merchandise stuff, flamesnation.ca or nationgear.ca. Appreciate you watching.